Yes, Geordies, welcome back to another episode. Most importantly, hope everyone's well. Once again, I just want to thank each and every one of you that subscribes, comments, likes, shares my videos because I generally appreciate you all. And I've hopefully got another interesting video lined up for you today. So first of all, talk to me. Yoane Wissa. It looks like talks are intensifying for Newcastle United and Yoane Wissa. He has left Brentford's training camp and he's pushing for a move. So this move could actually happen. So before we get into this episode, I want to know your thoughts. He's got a year left on his contract. He's currently 28, and obviously he probably will be away on AFCON duty during the winter months. So let me know, would you welcome Yoane Wissa to St. James's Park? Is this a profile, a player that excites you before we get into this? Because I have got an interesting video lined up. Now, we've just hired a technical director, so I'm going to tell you the difference between a technical director and a sporting director and exactly why Newcastle United might not actually hire a sporting director. And then we're going to look at Yoane Wissa because talks are really intensifying. We've put a bid in, that bid's been rejected. So I'm going to tell you exactly what Yoane Wissa will bring. We'll be looking at his style of play, looking at statistics, looking at his shot maps, looking at his heat maps, where he likes to position himself on the pitch, and if he could partner Alexander Isak. However, I must state the Yoane Wissa deal is not done. Tottenham are also interested. Obviously, they've got Thomas Frank. They're based in London, so he wouldn't be moving very far. So, look, there is going to be competition, but that could be Brentford trying to just get as much money out of Yoane Wissa as possible. But the first thing we're going to do is look at the birth of sporting directors, look at the time before sporting directors and how clubs were run that way, and then the era of sporting directors and exactly what they do on a daily basis. Before sporting directors, and the best way of putting this, think of Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger. They were the powers of their football club. So what I mean by that is they ran pretty much all aspects of the football club, barring the financial side and probably negotiating sponsorships. Everything else they ran, whether that be recruitment, player contracts, youth development, the pathway for youth development. So they typically controlled everything that went on with a daily basis. Now they reported back to the owners. That's not very often that happens now in today's football. But one thing is for sure, every football club is ran differently. Some managers have different responsibilities at every single football club. Some sporting directors have different responsibilities at every single football club. So I am generalizing when I say this, but no club is identical, like I've just mentioned. However, the principles are the same. So what do sporting directors actually do? In the olden days, it was the managers that relayed everything back to the owners. Now it's the sporting directors. The managers are left with everything that happens on the pitch. So they've got the job title of a head coach now, and the sporting director is everything else off the pitch. So whether that be sponsorships, finances, player contracts, player recruitment. So in an ideal world, a sporting director will lay out a 360-degree strategy for the club. So they're in charge with hiring the best manager to fit their identity, for example. So making sure everything is in line from academy level to first team. The whole idea of having a sporting director is to take charge of player recruitment to ensure that any signings made fit within the club's playing style and sporting vision. So it's up to a sporting director to identify a manager that fits their identity. Now, player signings are generally a team effort, but it's always spearheaded by the sporting director. And the reason everything's spearheaded by the sporting directors is because they're supposed to outlast the managers. The managers are the people that come and go in clubs. Sporting directors are meant to be there for a long, long time. Barcelona and Ajax have been the pioneers of having good sporting directors because they've consistently outlasted their managers, but they've always identified managers that fit the club's identity. So the easiest way of putting it is a sporting director in theory connects all the dots together, ensuring everybody is working towards one goal. Sporting director will do their best ability to appoint coaches, backroom staff who are deemed most capable of implementing the club's identity and define playing style. So they'll oversee everything, whether that be player recruitment and transfers, team strategy and beliefs, youth development, contract negotiations, sporting infrastructure and facilities. And then they'll also take charge of the budgeting and financial planning. So sporting directors should never tell managers what to do on a football pitch, what formation to play, what player selection. That should all be down to a manager. What to do in training, that should not be a sporting director's role. Sporting directors to do everything outside what goes on the football pitch. A manager takes charge of everything that happens in a football pitch. So what is a technical director? Well, in truth, they're not too dissimilar from a sporting director, because a technical director, in theory, is a sporting director's right-hand man. He oversees everything that goes on ground level. So you can pretty much call him a sporting director's assistant. So the difference between a sporting director and a technical director has a lesser executive powers and is tasked with overseeing the real day-to-day running of the club. In simplistic terms, he's the eyes and the ears on the ground for the sporting director. So the sporting director will delegate little jobs to the technical director that aren't big impacting decisions. Everything at board level, that's all the sporting director's role. So the main duties the technical director will do is analyse playing philosophy across academy to first team football, oversee coaching standards in performance departments, and youth development and pathway frameworks. Eddie Howe, make sure Eddie Howe's doing his job pretty much. And then if he's going to grass on Eddie Howe, he'll grass on him to the sporting director. That is pretty much a technical director. So he's the bridge between ground level football and the sporting director. Now, the reason why I know so much about this, and I probably shouldn't say this, and you're probably going to call me ridiculous as well, is because I actually nearly become a technical director at a football club about 2 to 3 years ago, but I rejected it. It was because, in truth, at that time, I'd never been hired by a football club. They had no structure. So I would have went into that role learning on the job. And I didn't want to learn on the job where there was no structure around us and everything was chaotic. Because if I come out badly in my first job, that would have given me a bad reputation. So I kind of looked at it and thought, right, I can take this short gap, and if it doesn't go well, then that's a bad reputation on me. Or I can just hold tight and pray that something comes up. So I kind of rejected the job, but do I regret it? A little bit, because sometimes in life you've got to take risks. But I just felt my instincts were about 2 to 3 years ago, they weren't in a good place. And for me to go in and learn on the job, it would have been extremely difficult. Had I had experience in the job, I probably would have taken it. But looking back now, I should have took it. But you know, you can't live with regrets. But this is why I know so much about these roles, is because I've got a couple of mates that are trying to get in that sporting director role, and I've kind of had to research technical directors before. Now, what I do find really, really interesting here is Newcastle United have hired a technical director before sporting director. That makes me think, are we actually going to hire a sporting director? Because a lot of clubs around different. For example, Manchester United do not have a sporting director, but they've got a technical director. Since Dan Ashworth left Man United, they have not rehired a sporting director. They hired a technical director in Joe Willock, but they've just given bigger responsibilities. They've given bigger responsibilities to Amarum and given the technical director bigger responsibilities. I've got a funny feeling Eddie Howe wants something similar. I've got a funny feeling that Eddie Howe wants somebody there, like a technical director, but he has a bigger say than what he would if a sporting director was there. I could be wrong. This is just my gut instinct, but it's very rare that you'll see a technical director hired before sporting director. The reason is because sporting directors hire their own assistants. They want to know who's coming in to help them. They want to pick the best candidate for that role that they think they'll get on with the best. So it's very, very rare that you will see a technical director hired before sporting director. This is why I think it's interesting that Eddie Howe wants a lot of say in Newcastle United, and by having a technical director there instead of a sporting director, he will have much more of a say than what he would if a sporting director was there. So I would not be surprised we didn't hire a sporting director. Once again, I could be wrong, but that's just the feeling I get. Because just think of it in any business. If you're looking for an assistant, you want to be that guy that hires that assistant. You don't want to walk in with an assistant already there, because what if you don't get on with them? Then what you're going to do, sack that assistant. So like, this is what I'm saying. It's a little bit funny. So I kind of feel like Eddie Howe wants a bigger say. Well, having a sporting director, you will not have a bigger say. But that's the difference between a technical director and a sporting director. It's kind of an assistant or a sporting director. That's pretty much all it is. But we are going to move on, because it looks like Yoane Wissa is that guy that Eddie Howe wants. We've failed on Hugo Ekitike. We've failed on João Pedro. We've failed on Brian Mbeumo. And it looks like attention is turned to Yoane Wissa. Now, I kind of feel like this is because he gives you that tactical flexibility. So we've seen him at Brentford, plays a lone striker, as you can see on the screen, but he's also played in a two-tier system where he's played alongside another person up front. Now, Yoane Wissa has 1 year left on his contract. Brentford have an option to trigger another year. Why haven't they done this yet? Now, I'll tell you exactly why they haven't done this, is because they won't trigger that other year until they know exactly what is happening with Wissa, because they want him to guarantee that he's going to be staying before they trigger that other year. Sounds the opposite of what normally happens, right? But I'll tell you why, because triggering that other year will earn Wissa more money. Now, that puts Wissa in a stronger position, because when a player has X, Y, or Z left years on his contract, and the club want to sell him, the player turns around to the club and says, if you want me to leave this, pay 50% of what I've got left on my contract and I'll leave. If not, I'm just going to reject whoever approaches me. So then the club have to pay 50% of what's left on the contract. Does that make sense? So if they give Wissa another year's contract, that means he's got 2 years left on his contract. So he's going to say, if you want me to go to Newcastle United, I want paid for a year and then I'll leave. If he's only got a year left on his contract, he might say, if you want me to leave now instead of next season, when I can go on a free, pay me 30% of this year and I'll leave. So that's what players do. So very rarely, unless a player is dead in the water and he's desperate for a way out, will a player put in a transfer request. Because as soon as they put in a transfer request, the club say to that player, well, it's up to you to find your own move. We've got nothing to do with you now. You've handed in a transfer request. So you've shown that you do not care about this contract. So you can leave without us paying you any of your contract. This is why Marcus Rashford won't hand in a transfer request. This is why Jadon Sancho won't hand in a transfer request, because they've still got a couple of years left on their contract and they're getting paid handsome. So if Man United do want to sell them, they can turn around and say, Man United, if you want me to leave this summer, pay me 50% of what's left on my contract. That's what tends to go on in football. So that's why Brentford have an option, but with Wissa likely to leave this summer, they don't want to trigger it yet because that puts Wissa in a stronger position to ask for more money. So that's the sticky situation Brentford are in. But if they don't offer him the contract, could just sit there and leave next season. So ideally, Brentford want to sell him this summer, even though they don't want to lose him because they've lost Brian Mbeumo. Contract situation has made them rethink their position. This is why Newcastle United should be clever in what we do and how we negotiate with Wissa. So I hope that made sense to you all. It made sense in my head because I've never negotiated a deal. I don't claim to be in the know or nothing. I have been present when deals have been negotiated, and I know this goes on. So this is sort of talks that will be happening. So it's interesting to me. I find this sort of thing very interesting. If Newcastle United are clever and say the right terminologies to Wissa and his camp, they can get a good deal here. Now, I also tweeted out that I didn't want Wissa. And the reason I said that is because at the time, Brentford were asking for 50 million. And I was sitting there thinking, hold on, we're in this position and they're asking for 50 million. With a year left on his contract, yes, I've got another option to trigger it. He's not worth 50 million. So we should not be paying anywhere next to 50 million because we're actually in a good position when it comes to these negotiations. Does that make sense? But also Tottenham are involved. So Tottenham can boost up his price, but it's not going to boost him up that much. So this is a type of conversation that will be happening between Brentford, Wissa's camp, and Newcastle United. And this is exactly why transfers take so long. But let's get into his style of play because there is a lot liked about Wissa, and he ticks the first box, and that first box is tactical flexibility. He does tick that box. So let's look at his style of play. So he's versatile. He's a hybrid forward. He can operate on the left as well as the right or centrally in different systems. So he's what I like to call a tactical chameleon because he gives you that tactical flexibility. Now, when it comes to finishing, he's clinical with first-time finishes. And this is what I really like about Wissa. His ability to ghost into space and find a knack for being in the good positions. And that also leads us on to my next point because he's extremely instinctive and he's got sharp reactions. So he's very good at picking up loose balls, rebounds, second balls. He's got a wide range of goals in his arsenal, which is very, very pleasing. When it comes to movement, he's fearless with his off-ball movement. He's got the ability to drift into pockets, receive the ball, but he's also got the pace to run in behind and stretch defenses. He attacks space really well. Now, when it comes to dribbling, I'm going to be honest, I don't find him the best dribbler, but he's got a nice profile. He's extremely balanced in his profile. He's quick, he's deceptively strong, he's energetic, and he's tireless. He's got excellent speed modulation, so he's got that ability to have stop-start movements where he changes his direction very quickly. And when I say he's deceptively strong, he's not very muscular. He only stands at 5'9", but he is very strong with his low center of gravity. So he's very difficult to knock off the ball. So when it comes to tactical fit, he's got a nice compact frame. He's got speed to burst, and that would make him ideal for chaotic transitional moments. That's exactly what Eddie Howe likes and how Newcastle United play. And just to add in there, he's comfortable finishing on both feet, and he's actually really strong in the air. Now, when it comes to areas for improvement, ball retention and press resistant ability. He's not the best in tight spaces. He can be dispossessed easily. He needs to understand how to shield the ball better. Wissa's best in open spaces. He's only got a successful take-on rate of 30%. Now, also defensive discipline. Now, Wissa works tremendously hard off the ball. He's an excellent presser. He's an aggressive presser. He works tirelessly off the ball. But what he needs to understand is pressing triggers. Make sure you press as a unit and not as an individual. So when you press as an individual, it's too easy to get packed out the game. Sometimes he gets baited into the press too easily. That's just because he's so eager to win the ball back. I'm not criticizing him for it, but Eddie Howe will have to coach into him just his structure when it comes to defensive discipline. So in a few words, how does he compare to Alexander Isak? Isak is a more well-rounded striker, somebody that is good in tight spaces, that can take on multiple players in one dribble. He's offering a mixture of it all, whereas Wissa is more an instinctive striker. He's an explosive finisher. Now, before we take a deep dive into what he likes to do on a football pitch, I want to look at his Premier League record because it is actually very good. In 2021-22 was his first season in the Premier League. He played 30 times, started 12 games, 7 goals, 1 assist. 2022-23, 38 games, 16 starts, 7 goals, 3 assists. 2023-24, 34 games, 29 starts, 12 goals, 3 assists. And then last season, he had 19 goals, none of them penalties were 4 assists. But the most pleasing part about all this is he's comfortable with both feet. And he's actually surprisingly good in the air despite being 5'9". He scored 25 goals with his right foot, 12 goals with his left foot, and he scored 8 goals with his head. So he's got that variation in his finishing. And that's probably why he's so good at snatching on rebounds and picking up loose balls in the penalty area. So the next thing we're going to look at is his touch map. And the reason I want to look at this is because I like a fluid rotational front three. I like players that can drift in and out at different areas because ultimately what you want to do is upset the opposition's defense. So you want to be your forwards to be comfortable in central areas as well as wider areas. And Wissa absolutely shows that in his touch map. He's comfortable on the right, he's comfortable centrally, he's comfortable on the left. So he's a drifter, and that suits exactly what Eddie Howe wants. Because if you look at our left winger, we give him the license to come inside. And if Wissa ever plays on the left-hand side, he'll have that license to come inside. So he fits the bill and ticks those boxes. Now, one thing I really do like about this is how many touches he has in the penalty area. I always say this about my strikers. I want my strikers to touch the ball as much as possible in the 6-yard box, in that 18-yard box, because that's where he's going to be his most dangerous. Now, Wissa ranks in the top 3 percentile for all players in the Premier League for touches in the penalty area. So that just shows how often he gets himself into the penalty box. So he's got that desire to get in between the posts, which I really like. And that takes us on to my next point, his shot locations. Now, this is really pleasing because look how many goals he scores in between the goal posts. If you've watched my previous videos, I speak about the importance of getting in between the posts, because if you're centrally, that gives you a larger goal to aim at. That gives you a more possibility, a more outcome of getting a goal from your shots, because you can place the ball in any corner you want. When you're shooting from tight angles, you've only got specific areas where you can beat the goalkeeper. Now, one thing I will say, there is a lot to like on this map, but there's also a lot of hate as well. Now, we need to take the bad with the good. Now, let's speak about the good first of all. Getting in that 6-yard box, picking up the loose balls, because that's where you're going to be your most dangerous, when you're in between the posts in that 6-yard box and getting cutbacks, picking up loose balls, getting bounce passes. That's the type of striker you get with Wissa. His ability to get on the blind side, ghost into space is absolutely exceptional. So I love his positioning inside the penalty area. Now, just to explain this graphic, the smaller the circle is the less of opportunity. The bigger the circle means it's a higher XG. It's a greater opportunity. You should be scoring from those opportunities. Now, he's overperforming his XG just. He had an XG of 18.59. He scored 19 goals. I'm happy with that. As long as you're either on level or overperforming your XG, you're doing something right. Now, where he's going wrong is he does miss chances. Wissa does miss chances, and that's because he snatches at things, and also because he works on instincts. There is a lot of big circles that aren't coloured in, which means he's missing big chances. So it's not about the positions he gets in, it's about his shot selections. He needs to be a little bit more calculated on the type of shots he takes rather than the positions he gets into, because he gets into good positions, but he's just choosing the wrong shot. So that's something that Eddie Howe would have to work on. Now, what I also don't like about these areas, he very rarely scores from outside the central areas. As you can see, those shots from tighter angles, he very rarely scores. So I would be saying cut out those shots. Also cut out the shots from outside the box, because none of his goals have come outside the box. So he's got that box presence. He's got that fox in the box instincts. So that's where he does his best work. So I'll be telling them, don't bother hovering outside the box. let's get you inside that penalty area. Now, could he play as a rotation option, Alexander Isak? Absolutely, because he's got a similar lingo play. He's very good at bringing others into play. The only thing that lets him down is his ball retention and success take on rate. That's the only thing that lets Wissa down. When it comes to bringing others into play, he's exceptional. Now, he's so good at just inviting the midfield into the attack and then getting into the penalty area. That's what I want from my striker. So could he rotate with Alexander Isak? Absolutely. Could he play alongside Alexander Isak? Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. I'll show you why. Because again, this suggests why he could play alongside Alexander Isak, because he's got that fluidity. If Alexander Isak comes short, he's got that ability to stretch defenses. If he comes short, Alexander Isak's got that ability to stretch defenses, but also he wants to get inside that box. So that'll give Alexander Isak more freedom to create opportunities for teammates, but also himself. And there's nothing more dangerous than a self-creating striker. And that's exactly what Wissa can do, but also Alexander Isak. So how does he compare directly to Alexander Isak? Well, again, I've said this before about Alexander Isak. He is one of the most complete strikers on the planet. He creates a lot of opportunities. He creates a lot of shots per 90. He has a high assist rate. His XG is excellent. His non-penalty goals is excellent. His touches per 90, excellent. Successful take-ons, progressive carries, progressive passes. Like, he's elite at pretty much every attribute. Whereas there is some areas for improvement for Wissa. Now, what I do like about Wissa is XG rate, which means he's getting into good positions, is very high, which is really pleasing. And his non-penalty goals is very high, which is really pleasing. Now, he also works hard off the ball. Blocks per 90, tackles and interceptions. He wins a lot of aerial duels despite being 5'9", and he dribbles and he tackles a lot of dribblers. So off the ball work rate is exceptional from Wissa. Now, one thing that does let Wissa down is his chance creation. He doesn't create many opportunities for his teammates. So if I'm Eddie Howe and I'm looking at that, I'll be thinking, how can we get your assists from B to A? How can we get your shot creating actions from B to A? Now, most of his shot creating actions come from after a shot. So what I mean by that is when he has a shot, goalkeeper saves it, and then somebody else has a shot afterwards. That's where Wissa's most chance creation comes from. So you can class it as him being selfish, but that's probably because he's always on the end of chances. So if a goalkeeper does save it and somebody else gets a rebound, that's not his fault. But I do want to see him have a little bit more creativity, just so he can have that well-roundedness where he can supply for Alexander Isak as well as Isak supplying for him. So I hope that's all made sense for you. Now, there is a lot to like about Yoane Wissa. Somebody that constantly wants to get him behind, somebody that thrives in chaotic moments. That's exactly what Eddie Howe wants. Now, there's also areas for improvement. Now, the disadvantages of Wissa is he's 28, so he will be 29 soon. He'll be away on the AFCON as well, so we've got to take that in consideration. So for me, it depends on the price. If Brentford are stuck in 150 million or even 40 million, I probably wouldn't say it. I would say there's better out there with a higher upsell, and there's probably better out there for better value for money and a bigger ceiling. But if we're looking at 30 million, maybe 25 million, if we're clever in how we negotiate, obviously that Premier League experience counts for something. But it's not just all about my opinion. I want to hear your opinion. Would you be happy to welcome Yoane Wissa to St. James's Park? For me, if we're bringing somebody like Wissa, we've got to strengthen that midfield. I am incredibly worried about that midfield. I can't lie, because we play with a 3 midfield. Eddie Howe will sometimes adapt to that and change that to a 2 midfield. But we've only got 5 senior midfielders. If we're playing with 3, imagine if 2 of them get injured and the other one gets suspended. Very unlikely, but it can happen. So what we're going to do in that instinct. So I'm really worried about this midfield. I think we do need a midfielder, but I want to hear from you guys. Would you welcome Wissa? Let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, once again, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and until next time, away the lads.